Buenos días de nuevo.
Good morning again, everyone. So after the opening ceremony with the authorities and the opening speech by Stefano Dominioni, who gave us this perspective on the thorough working of the Cultural Roots project in Europe, they gave us a context of all the topics that will be covered in this seminar: culture, heritage, memory, and values for the promotion of the integrity of Europe and peace. This is the start of the seminar itself, with the works of the people that have received the grants. So first we will have Maria Laura Gasparini from the Center for Advanced Studies in Tourism, the University of Bologna. But first I'd like to introduce the person who will be moderating her speech, Enrique Moradiellos García, who is a great, I will highlight it. It is a great honor to have him here. For many reasons, he's part of the Yuste Foundation. He's contemporary history professor at the University of Extremadura, member of the Royal Academy of History, and he's also been a professor in other universities. For example, Complutense Madrid. He focuses on the in the interwar period, the Cold War and the Second World War. So, and he has also published many books: El Reñidero de Europa, Don Juan Negrín, the figure of his PhD thesis, Antisemitismo and Holocausto. Devastating work that I recommend you to read, especially for you, the youth. And he also received the National History Award in 2017 for his book Historia Mínima de la Guerra Civil, de la Guerra Civil Española. And he's also a member of the Royal Academy of History since 2020. So, Enrique, thank you very much for being here with us today once again in this doctoral seminar. This is not the first time you're here. It is the last time of many more times to come. So thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Miguel, por tus palabras.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for your kind words. Sorry. And he has a very good depiction of my character and my merits. Thank you all, and very welcome to you, the students. These panels try to represent at the same time, or try to pair at the same time, a young person, a young student, with someone with more expertise or with a longer trajectory, so that we can have a common view of it. And well, this is open to all of these speakers. I have the honor to introduce the first of our speakers. I will give you the floor as soon as possible. And after your intervention, I will come back again to this stage to give you some considerations or remarks, which will not be a criticism at all. It will be a collection of ideas that your speech has elicited in us. In my case, I have the pleasure to be introducing Maria Laura Gasparini, who is Argentinian and Italian at the same time. You belong to both the academy of both countries, but in this case, Italy, Bologna, the University of Bologna. But you started in Argentina, although you are now doing your PhD thesis and your PhD dissertation on tourism at the University of Bologna. We've been working on it for 10 years. And you have worked in several continents, and in Europe, Latin America, and even in Australia. And you will be talking about a topic that perfectly fits into the main objective, the main topic of this seminar. Santos Julia, one of my teachers, said, if you have a good title, you can explain more than half of your whole speech. And look at this title: European Cultural Roots Between Sustainable Local Development and Transnational Cooperation Tools. So you have the floor. Thank you.
Bueno, buenos días a todos y a todas.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start in English right now. But first, I'd like to thank Enrique for this kind of introduction and the Yuste Foundation for giving me the opportunity to be here today and what I'm doing with my PhD dissertation.
It has been said, the title is European Cultural Roots Between Sustainable Local Development and Transnational Cooperation Tools. Let me just start just by introducing the agenda of what I would try to cover during this presentation. The idea is to make a short introduction and put into context the PhD that I'm carrying on, that is also in the context of another framework of cooperation, European cooperation, which is an Horizon 2020 project. I will present then the aims of this paper that I have tried to make it match with the objectives of the seminar and the goals of this year seminar. I will present some theoretical and policy background that I am basing my research on, or that I am developing or researching at the moment to see if they fit and they help explaining this transnational cultural roots program. I will briefly present the program. It has been very well explained by Mr. Dominioni previously, but I will highlight a few aspects that are interesting for my research, and they are very important points to highlight. Some examples. I have not included this in the summary, but I thought it would have been good to include some examples to see concretely how some cultural roots are putting into practice principles and values from the Council of Europe. The research question that I am posing for this study, and exploring a new concept that I will develop later. It's been proposed or suggested by other academics, but the idea is to develop it further, which is this idea of cultural root as sustainable, supranational local system. So how they have this dual role of local development, but also cooperation tools at a transnational level. And then some preliminary conclusions and way forward, because really this is at the beginning, and I will explain that I am in the process of doing this PhD. I'm in the second year, and this is a particular PhD program because it is financed by a European project, which is called Rural, Promotion of Rural Museums and Heritage Sites in the Vicinity of European Pilgrimage Route. So it's very much a focus on linear routes. As it has been said, there are these different types of cultural routes. I will focus on this PhD on the governance models of linear routes, which are based on physical paths like Camino de Santiago or Via Francigena. What we can see in the map is just 3 of the routes that leads to Rome, that are the main area where we are working on with this project in Italy. And my idea, I'm very interested in the multi-level governance, so how these routes that really traverse countries, regions, municipalities, how they interact, what is the coordination between actors, and so, or the lack of coordination in order to carry out these projects, also as tourism, sustainable tourism projects. These are the ways that are the partners of, there are 16 partners in this project, but the pilgrimage routes are 6, the one that you can see here, Ways of St. James, Via Francigena, Romea Germanica, and Romea Strata are all pilgrimage routes leading to Rome. St. Olaf Ways in Norway and Scandinavian countries, and the Way of Mary that is bringing together different destinations, mainly for this project, goes from Slovakia, Hungary, leading to a sanctuary in Romania. So I will introduce now the focus of this paper, no, that I'm trying to work on, because it is not a final project, and I am developing now, and I'm hoping also that through the comments that will come up out of the seminar, I will be able to improve it. But the purpose is to really analyze the entire cultural routes program. So try to shift the focus not only on pilgrimage routes, but see the cultural routes program through the lenses of some economic geography theories that I am studying now in the PhD, in order to see how they can constitute useful instruments for local development and also territorial cooperations, which are main goals of the European Union. For this particular contribution, the question, but it's actually is going to be relevant also for the entire PhD, is in which ways cultural routes are useful tools to implement European policies at local level. So Council of Europe policies and also European Union policies. The research approach for this has been mainly a desk research, so analyzing, and we will see now some of the conventions and some of the policies at European level in terms of culture, tourism, rural development, and also complementing it with some practical information coming from cultural routes representative. The idea is to compare what these policies are setting as priorities, and also seeing these theories of territorial governance, multi-level governance, in order to see how cultural routes can match or can be explained through these theories and can implement the priorities of the European policies. The originality or the value of this is that its cultural routes are a recent or quite recent academic research topic. It is increasingly, the interest is increasing, but there are not so many studies focusing on this aspect, no? On the multi-level and coordination aspect of cultural routes. So this is the aim as well, to contribute to the literature on this, and more in general, taking cultural routes as a topic on academic research. So first of all, I will explain a little bit some of the theoretical and policy background that I was mentioning before. So let's say, mainly two theories I have taken that I think are very useful to explain how cultural routes work, or how they are inserted in this context, this European context. And one of these concepts is the multi-level governance, no? That means this power. So sorry that I'm moving this. It means this sharing of decision-making powers at different levels, no? From European to national, regional, local, how the coordination is done among all these levels, and the number of actors that are involved, because we shift from just looking at public sector actors to really think of multiple actors that are involved in these policy-making processes at various levels, no? So in the European context, this means coordinating action by supranational institutions and then going downwards to the different authorities in order to implement European policies. And I think, well, cultural routes are definitely inserted in this multi-level governance of the European Union and Council of Europe. They have members across all the levels, and these networks really involve actors, different actors across all levels. So they are part of this multi-level governance dynamics. Then another concept that sometimes is confused with multi-level governance is that of territorial governance, which is also interested in the coordination mechanism among different actors, but the focus is the key word in the territorial level. So really taking a place-based approach to policies and thinking on what are the resources of certain places and that can be developed in order to create opportunities for local development, social cohesion. So it's complementary, or it's inside the multi-level governance framework, but it is really have some key characteristics that have to do with the specificity of the places, the endogenous resources that the local actors can identify and then use as tools for local development. The territorial governance is also very focused at the subnational level, so really at the place, at the territories where tourism or where the activities are taking place, and involving a variety of factors, as we said before. And this is exactly the case of cultural roots as well, no? As it has been outlined also by Mr. Dominioni, they are really complex territorial systems. They involve a number of factors in these projects, and they are very much territorial projects because they are, even if they have the framework and then they are supported by the Council of Europe, they are initiated by associations or by organizations at the local level. So they can be examples of territorial projects developed at local actors and then interacting with other scales thanks to being part of a transnational program like the Cultural Roots program. This is very long, I won't go through this, but it was just to highlight, because in order to do this study, I have to rely and to investigate a bit of the French and the Italian geographic literature that are really saying very much similar things into different languages, but they are defining territorial governance in similar terms, no? And I will just highlight some of them that have to do with this that I was saying before, that the territory is seen as a project, so not just something inherited, but really the place for action, so it's socially constructed. And in Italian literature, they talk about active territoriality, so really the active role of the local actors in identifying the resources to put into value and then creating projects like the ones of the cultural roots. They also talk about something, well, this more in the French literature, when they talk about geographical proximity and institutional proximity, which I thought it was very key as well for cultural roots, because cooperation is not only based on geographical proximity, but it really has to do with this organized or institutional proximity that is related to the sense of belonging or the sharing of certain values in order to then cooperate. And this is something that is also taken in Italian literature and is called transcale or transcalar relations, when thanks to sharing some values, in this case European values regarding the value of culture, they are able, these different territorial actors are able to cooperate across scales. And then the Italian literature go further, to develop one concept that is called local territorial system. That is a little bit the one that I am taking on to develop this new concept of supranational local system, which is basically the same. So the interactions at the local level between actors and the possibility to create development projects thanks to cooperation and valuing the resources that they have, but also taking always in consideration this relationship with supranational actors. And I have added lately, because I have been have the chance to read a little bit about critical heritage studies, so I thought this was also something interesting, also related with geography, because there are the topic also of landscape as heritage, and this I think is very relevant because it relates to really the role of citizenship and citizens in identifying what heritage they want to transmit and they want to protect. And it's also questioning some things such as the authorized heritage discourse, so what could be considered heritage and what's not. So it's taking this critical approach to heritage and to the process of deciding what to be transmitted, what to be used and recognized and heritage, and how to manage it. I also thought this is very relevant for cultural roots, and I have found, well, in this, it's a very recent literature, where they talk about borderscapes as well, and how the cultural heritage can really help in breaking the borders, and not only identifying cultural heritage as a nation-building concept, but really recognizing the value of cooperating and having this common or shared landscape or shared heritage. And this is the case that we are highlighting with cultural roots. So a type of we can say that cultural roots are a new category of cultural assets, no? That are bringing together different type of heritage, and in different countries, going beyond this concept of heritage as just belonging to one nation, no? But opening up. And well, having said that, regarding some of the literature on the theoretical background that I'm trying to use in order to analyze cultural roots, I will go through briefly through some of the conventions that have been previously mentioned as well, and that are at the basis of the cultural roots program. Well, going from international global convention as the UNESCO, but then I will focus more on the Council of Europe Landscape Convention and the Faro Convention, and the role that they have, and how the cultural roots are really implementing them practically. I hope it's a lot of information in this slide, but the idea was to highlight some of the main cultural Council of Europe conventions that have been mentioned previously. The first one in 1954, the Cultural Convention of the Council of Europe, which really defined the concept of this European cultural heritage and the idea of cooperating through culture. So it's at the basis of the work that then the Council of Europe does. And these two more recent conventions, the Landscape Convention from 2000 in Florence, where it's going also in this direction of recognizing not only elements of heritage to be highlighted, but also the context in which these heritage are, so the landscape. So going further in this notion of heritage, and also taking into consideration not only outstanding heritage like the UNESCO Convention, but also ordinary heritage and even degraded heritage that is recognized. And again, putting the focus on the participatory approach, so on the people recognizing what heritage or what landscape in this case to protect and to highlight. And the Faro Convention is one that is very much at the core of also the activities of cultural roots, that put the focus on the local communities and their role identifying the heritage they want to highlight, and also how to protect it, how to manage it, how to use it. Because the Faro Convention, I think, is very relevant in the sense that goes from a notion of just protecting, conserving heritage to one to really for whom we are protecting it, and how we make it available to others, and putting it into use, and how it can be also this tool for local development. So these are very relevant conventions. And then on the other side, the European Union also have a number of policies. I have been mainly interested in the cultural, tourism, rural development, and also territorial cooperation policies to see, well, how do they see the cooperation and the local development through cultural and cultural tourism. Even if we know that the European Union, in terms of culture and tourism, have more of a supporting role to member states, but they have, in any case, set agendas, such as, for example, the new European Agenda for Culture, where they set guidelines and recommendations for member states to then implement. Something relevant for this new European Agenda is that it's really acknowledging cultural roots and the potential to promote the European values. Then in terms of tourism, it has been mainly based or managed by the economic part of seen as an economic activity from the Directorate General of Growth, but they acknowledge as well the role of cultural roots. And the latest communication that is from 2000 2010 also mentioned the role of cultural tourism that for Europe is very important. And then in terms of rural development, the European Union has more power in terms of the common agricultural policy, and a program that I wanted to highlight is the LEADER program, which has a very important role and takes an approach very much similar to the territorial governance approach. So really thinking about place-based policies and activities. And I are recently working a lot with cultural roots. I know many examples at transnational level and also in Italy, where local action groups are cooperating thanks to cultural roots projects. So it's a very interesting approach. And of course, cultural roots are seen as a way to diversify or complement traditional economic activities in rural areas. And just to finalize, to say a few words about the cohesion policy, because we are talking about the role that culture can have in bringing Europeans together and cooperating. In the case of the cohesion policy, the idea is to really balance the different regions in Europe and cooperate and bring them together. There are a number of programs that stimulate this territorial cooperation. And again, the concept of the notions of territorial governance is it's important and is acknowledged in this territorial agenda from the EU. In this regard, so the contribution from the cultural route is definitely to promote cross-border cooperation. As we know, they traverse a number of rural areas, and they can be a tool also to tackle the population and generate economic opportunities. And the four macro-regional strategies, the four macro-regions that exist in Europe, all acknowledge the role of culture and cultural roots in cooperating and tackling common challenges through these regions. Just to finalize with this overview, I wanted to highlight the EU funding opportunities that there are and that are related to cultural roots. So each of these priorities of policies, then most of them are then related to funding opportunities to implement these priorities, these policy priorities. In the case of cultural roots, since they are transversal, they can really make use of different funds from those structural funds developed for the cohesion policy or the common agricultural policy, but then there are a number of specific programs in which cultural roots are involved. The Creative Europe program, which is specifically for cultural programs, but then Erasmus in the sense of cooperation and exchanges among young Europeans, and Horizon, that is, in the case of at least also my PhD, is financing research and innovation activities also in the terms of cultural roots. So I will briefly introduce the program, very briefly, because it has been perfectly explained. But it's a program that is an initiative from the Council of Europe, of course, created in 1949, as it has been said, with this objective of really, through traveling through space and time, give this possibility to Europeans to recognize their shared common heritage and sense of belonging to Europe. The first itinerary, as it has been said, is the Camino de Santiago in 1987, with these very relevant values that pilgrimage and medieval pilgrimage had in creating this European identity and this sharing among cultures from those times, and that is recovered now. And currently, the 48 cultural routes that form the program. I wanted to highlight some things of the definition of the cultural route, because I think it's really defined perfectly the aims, and it's actually quite a complex concept, no? Because it says that the cultural routes are cultural, educational heritage, and tourism cooperation projects aiming at the development and promotion of an itinerary or of a series of itineraries. As we have seen, there are a number of different cultural routes based on historical figures or religious aspect or artistic phenomenon and so on, but that have this transnational importance and significance for the understanding and respect of common European values. So this is the latest definition, very much complex and taking many things into consideration. And I wanted to highlight how through cultural roots we can help constructing and developing further in this sense of belonging to Europe. No? Obviously putting into practice the values. I have named here just well, some of the most important ones, the one from the Council of Europe in terms of human rights, the rule of law, and democracy, but then all the other values that cultural roots put into value: cultural diversity, intercultural, interreligious dialogue, tolerance, solidarity, freedom of movement, and mutual understanding across borders. So really, they help creating this cooperation among different cultures, bridging this East-West divide, and we can talk about this concept of cultural Europeanization or process of building a European identity based on cultural cooperation. This has been already explained. There are different types of root geographical macro categories that helps to understand a little bit this complex concept of cultural roots, from the linear ones that are the ones that are mainly interested with pilgrimage route, but then the territorial, where a certain type of heritage is shared in an area, in a territory, are the reticular ones that are networks or could be called virtual routes, because they are points that are spread in different geographical locations but sharing a common heritage or a common topic. So they are thematic routes. I won't go through these. These are the requirements to be certified that, of course, have to do with defining the theme and identify the elements to be highlighted, creating this European network, which for me is then at the core of my analysis, coordinating joint actions and creating a common visibility. So just to highlight from this, the network criteria that is the one that I'm more interested in, since cultural roots are really, even if they can be organized, and the governance model can be very different, different hierarchies, different types of models, but the idea that they have to be constituted as network is key, and it's networks that are mixed between different types of actors. No? So they are multi-actor networks at different scales, from the transnational to the very local, and they are a way of, they provide these networks of cooperating among this wide range of factors, from the cultural sector to the tourism, rural development, academic sector, of course, as has been said, the academic, the scientific committee, it's always part of these cultural roots, but they have this bottom-up approach. And the 5 field of actions that I won't go through them, but these are the main activities, and they are, we could say that the mission of cultural roots is really set by compiling and complying with these fields of actions. No? So cooperation in research and development, enhancing European memory and history and heritage, developing cultural programs for young European, contemporary cultural activities, so not only from the past, but also exhibitions and contemporary works to put in value the culture, and the cultural tourism aspect, which is one of the ones that I'm mainly interested in through sustainable cultural development. I wanted to highlight just 2 examples from cultural roots. I'll try to go to be brief, just so you can see some of the actions that these cultural roots implement on the ground that are related to these policy priorities and Council of Europe conventions. The Via Francigena is a linear route, it's a pilgrimage route, and it's a perfect example of multi-level governance. So we have 79 stages across 4 countries, 16 regions involved, over 600 municipalities, coordinated by a European association that has been formed in 2001. They have started with a small number of municipalities and have grown to 216 members at the moment. And they cooperate, so they are a network of institutions carried out different activities along the route. Actually, in 2015, they have applied, or they have started the application to be certified also by UNESCO, such as Santiago, that it has been been already recognized. I wanted to highlight mainly from Via Francigena the aspect of the governance model, know how they, through also making use of European projects, they have managed to create mechanisms to collaborate more. So for instance, this memorandum of understanding between all the regions that cross the route, it has been a step in order to collaborate, because this is also one of the most challenging aspects then, so how to coordinate between the different actors, and mainly in walking routes, this can be very visible if there is no coordination between regions. The person, the pilgrim or the tourist that is traversing these routes can notice this lack of coordination. But they have grown in order they have grown to be now considered opinion leaders in Italy, and they are always involved in tourism policy development and strategic plans, so they have a key role to play in Italy. And there are some regions that have taken much more responsibility and have taken really cultural routes and pilgrimage routes as a strategy to promote tourism, and this is the case. One of the regions is Tuscany, that has really created a law to organize the activity. They have invested a lot in infrastructure and in service provision, and also in a recent initiative of a regional atlas to highlight pilgrimage and walking routes. And another example of a different type of route, the European Route of Jewish Heritage, it's a network of different points, different cities, and different institutions that are spread across Europe. They have been certified in 2004 as a cultural route of the Council of Europe, and they are really a network of networks, so mainly of cultural associations, academic institutions, museums, foundations, and so on, that they are cooperating in order to protect and promote Jewish heritage. And they have really, well, they have many initiatives, but they could also be an example of a borderscape or a possibility to cooperate across border on a shared topic, such as in this case, Jewish heritage. They have complied with a number of activities, but I also wanted to highlight this role that they have managed to have at European level, raising the voice of Jewish heritage and Jewish matters, and they have taken a key role in the creation of a European strategy to combat anti-Semitism. So really also providing new narratives about Jewish heritage. So they are also another example of putting into practice the values and also implementing the priorities set in the policies that we have seen before. And briefly to go then to the research question that I was posing for this paper, and this is actually a work in progress, is in which ways these cultural routes are useful tool to implement transnational set goals, such as the one from the Council of Europe, the European Union, at the local level. And this is building also considering some other scholars that have been taking this into consideration. So for instance, some scholars from Italy that question what could be the role, or if cultural routes can be considered local territorial systems, or if these cultural routes are really representing effective tools for sustainable local development. So trying to build from what has been already done. There is this, I won't go through this because this is just to highlight from from the different theories, what are the aspects that are relevant for cultural roots. So just to go to this novel topic or novel concept that is called supranational local system, is this idea of seeing that cultural roots share and have several characteristics similar to territorial governance, since they are developed by local actors, taking into consideration their resources, cooperating with local but also supralocal levels, and they form this complex territorial system. So this concept that has been actually proposed by Asari and Dalari in 2017, but not really further developed, is a concept of supranational local system. So really seeing that cultural cultural roots are formed at the local level, so spontaneously grassroots projects, but then they are based on the territorial identity or an important aspect for the territories that they cross, but are embedded in this international context that is given by a supranational organization such as the Council of Europe. So this is really in line with the ideas and the concept from territorial governance, and break this dichotomy or contradiction between local and global, because they are really being complementary, and actions at the local level have a relevance also at the global context. So this could be a novel or an interesting concept that I would like to further develop in order to explain cultural roots and how they contribute to local development and territorial cooperation. These are some of the characteristics that I have seen that cultural roots have that correspond to this model that we could call supranational local system, and just as a kind of summary. So they are multi-actor networks, as we already said, based on endogenous cultural resources. They are developed as collective projects, and they have this notion of territory, this active territoriality, so really local actors creating the territory by taking actions and creating projects, in this case through cultural roots. The priority fields of actions also are very important because they set the mission of these cultural projects, cultural and sustainable tourism projects, and they have multi-scale dimension, as we have seen already, and they relate to this notion of organized proximity. So these actors are cooperating based on similar and shared values, that are networks of factors that are spread across different countries, but then they take action at local level. So it's also this cooperation based on both geographical proximity, but also institutional or organized proximity. So they are bottom-up grassroots projects, but then they respond to top-down policy priorities. So this localization concept, where we see that at local level, they put into practice the principles of conventions and the values of the Council of Europe and European policies, contributing, of course, to socioeconomic development and highlighting the heritage as it's perceived by the community. So this, in line with the Faro Convention, this key role of local communities in choosing the heritage and being active in identifying and managing their heritage, but also at supranational level, they are inserted in this multi-level governance system. So they can really be seen as these supranational tools for cultural promotion, and the idea will be that travelers, and this is more in the case of pilgrimage and walking routes, do not perceive the crossing of borders when they are traversing this route, but could be applied to all kinds of routes. So this shared heritage concept. So just some preliminary conclusions, and I'm sorry. There is a message. Can I do something? No. I keep going? Okay, yes, if you can, see. So this contribution aims to propose this novel, possible theoretical framework. So as you can see, it's really in development, and the idea is to, okay, I continue, that they are able to or provide an opportunity to analyze cultural roots as tools for local development and transnational cooperation. Thank you. It is a first approximation, of course, to a concept that, as I said before, it has been proposed very lightly so far, but the idea is to go further and see not only, as I have seen so far, if they correspond with policies and priorities at the international level, but also to see if this can be useful for at the practical level for cultural roots. So the idea is to further developing and seeing if they are able, if it is a useful concept to explain the characteristics of these roots and the role that they can have in local development. But based on this analysis, so from the theories that we have seen from economic geography on multi-level governance and territorial governance, and on the other side, the policy priorities at EU level, we can affirm that they can be, this framework could be useful to explain and to understand better the role of cultural roots, not only in academic terms, of course, but also in terms of policymakers, not to really prove and show the value that they have as local development tools and transnational cooperation. The evidence collected, well, as I said before, and the examples try to outline this ability to put in practice concretely these priorities and contributing to this renewed territorial cohesion and European identity building that we are interested in based on common values. Of course, there is more room for cross-sectoral and multi-level governance cooperation. That this is the wider topic of my PhD, is to see how these different levels that are involved in cultural roots can cooperate more and how there can be more cooperation across policies, because this fragmentation really diminishes the potential that cultural roots can have to fulfill these priorities. And as I said at the beginning, still cultural roots being an under-researched topic, there is a lot of room to be for development and to use this understanding in filling this gap, but also providing a different approach to understand the role of cultural roots. Of course, just to highlight the limitations of the study, further research needs to be done. So I am still working in order to see how this can be useful, and I would like to coordinate either interviews or an online questionnaire to cultural roots representatives in order to gather some more characteristics and information that can help me understand if this framework can be useful. As I said, also throughout the presentation is part of a wider research on the multi-level governance of cultural roots, where I am mainly interested in linear pilgrimage routes. So I should probably or definitely will have more evidence coming in the next month from the pilgrimage route that I am involved in, that are the 3 routes leading to Rome that I highlighted at the beginning. So of course, all suggestions and ideas and critics are more than welcome. And just to finish, 2 future cooperation opportunities, but they have been a little bit highlighted already by the presentation by Mr. Dominioni, that are this opportunity to implement the cultural route programs in other continents, such as Latin America. I think this is very promising, and I know they are going further in order to implement a similar program in Latin America. So of course, this is a very interesting opportunity. And in terms of further academic opportunities, I think this is a great opportunity to have this kind of seminar by the Carlos Quinto European Award, but also the academic workshop that has been discussed previously. It's also a very fruitful opportunity to get in contact with other academics that are working on cultural roots. That it's a small group, but it's interesting to know and to complement, because it is a multifaceted topic. So I am seeing it more from the local development and tourism development approach, but I can be complemented by historians and from a number of other disciplines that are looking at other things, not only from the governance or the organization point of view, but also in terms of the other side, so from the demand side, the motivations to take this kind of trips, and so on. So these kind of academic opportunities are also very useful. And definitely European projects are a key to create these links and this cooperation between the members of cultural roots. So I think this was it. This is some of the references, not all of them. And I thank you very much for your attention. I'll take a little bit of water.
Muchas gracias, María Laura, por esta presentación que ha sido elegante de forma.
That was a very elegant presentation. It was very elegant in form, and it had very interesting contents. I'm sure that your colleagues have learned much, and they can inspired by what you said to follow your own model. I will not say much about your presentation, because the point of these seminars is to go beyond the core idea, which I think is very robust and very well supported. But rather than that, I would like to offer you some comment So this cross-disciplinary seminar achieves its goal, which is to have different approaches to the same object. I will give you 3 points for you to consider if you think appropriate, and also for the rest of the colleagues here. First, some thoughts regarding the discipline you start from. Economic and cultural geography from the humanistic French school. Well, in Spain, and it can be translated into other languages, there are 2 notions that would apply here. One of them is place. Sites, and cultural roads link sites. There are human movements that go along from site to site. Site has a classical definition. It's a geographical point. Yuste, for instance, has been a site so far, and it can be defined by latitude and longitude and a number of classical points. It's latitude north, 40 degrees, I don't know how many seconds, and longitude east longitude, so on and so forth. This is a geographical notion that allows us to know about the globe. It is site, but there is another word, which is place. Place is a physical location that is indeed on a site. We are solid beings, and we humanize sites, and they become places. And related to the places, there are feelings, there is meaning, because sites withhold significance and meaning. Yuste was a site for you, but from now on, I think it will become a place, because it will bring thoughts, related thoughts, not just because we are in the same room an emperor lived before moving to his palace, but there is also a load of meanings for the Spanish and Ibero-American history. It is not only a legal, administrative, geographical aspect regarding the cultural heritage. Emperor Charles V would be the chief of state of 9 current European countries, and some others in Ibero-American. He was the king of Hungary. He was the lord of in Austria, an emperor in the Roman, what's now Germany, Naples. He was the father of a king of Portugal, because he married a Portuguese. He was the lord of the vice kingdom of Spain, Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Salvador, and also parts of Panama. And he was the lord of the vice kingdom of Peru, which is now Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, and the northern part of Chile. What I mean by this is that Yuste is a site and a place. There is an emblem and a symbol of links and connections that would eventually become the West. It is not only Europe, it is not only the Mediterranean culture, which was the center of the world. It went much beyond the Mediterranean, beyond Europe, and we started speaking about the West. Let's consider this, and I hope that for you, Yuste is not just a site, but also a place related to your own personal experiences. You have highlighted something that I think is very interesting and very well appreciated from the outside. This is a phenomenon of unity, of almost systemic unity. Like you said before, it is an economic asset that is worth developing And that's very obvious. This is why the tourism industry is very powerful, and it should be so, because societies have to nourish themselves and they have to be fed them every day. And for that, you need prosperity. Otherwise, there is the law of the wilderness, the Wild West. And it is a legal asset that needs to be protected, and this is why you cannot tear down these walls. Even if you might think that you could build a road here, you cannot do it because it is a protected asset, and it is an immaterial legacy. It is intangible legacy that we need to preserve. It came from another generation. We received it, and we have to pass it on to the next generation. It's a long chain that goes through history. It's a site and a place and a legal asset, and it produces law, and it can be used to generate memory and identity representations. Some of them are good and some of them are not. Even the bad cultural heritage, such as the Omaha beach and the disembarkment beaches in Normandy, they take us back to a brutal event, or the School of the Army in Buenos Aires. We need to remember that there is no road of roses. There's always a little bit of everything. And then related to the pilgrimage routes, I would like to recommend you to read The Cult to the Saints. That's a book by Peter Brown that opened up new ways after the Roman world. It was a Mediterranean world. The northern shores of the Mediterranean, the southern shores of the Mediterranean, they all were Roman, and all the roads led to Rome. There is a hub that's the headquarters of the power, Rome. In the Jewish culture has one temple. Jerusalem is the only temple. That's the place to go. Or Islam. Mecca is the only place to pilgrim to. When the Roman Empire came down and Christianity raised over that side, something new came up, and that's essentially European. That's the cult to saints, with the same importance as any other cult in Rome, Jerusalem, or Mecca. With saints, you don't need to go to the same place because their relics are scattered around Europe, and the population go to those places. Roads create great spaces. The Roman Hospitality Act created sacred places. The roads were sacred, and they were protected by the relevant god. And you could go to the holy place, such as St. Andrews or Fatima or whatever. Take this into account, because something that's pretty obvious, such as yet another road or pilgrimage route, have very important things behind. Saints are important for God and humans. They are an open window to God, and that's a lot to say, because they create a break in the cosmotheist order that up to the 5th century was the prevailing one in our history. And that's all from me. These are just some ideas for you to expand your approach on this issue, and I now give the floor to your colleagues, or my colleagues, for their comments or thoughts. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Moradiellos. We now give the floor to Professor Baigorri, and then Professor Milosevic, and then Professor Teresa Freses.
I'm going to follow the path that has been opened by Enrique Moradiellos, and in that sense I wish to talk about the geographical theoretical framework that you have mentioned, based on French and Italian literature, as you said, where I would suggest you to open the focus to critical geography, radical geography, that comes from the 1970s, or even much earlier if we go back to ENRIQUE, for example, way back in between the 19th and the 20th century. In the 70s, I was starting a PhD project on urban geography and urban networks, which I never submitted. I turned to different routes in my research. But at that time, I happened to come across the literature that was thriving at that moment in the radical sphere. It can probably be summarized in two journals, Hérodote, created by Yves Lacoste, whom I met personally and I brought to Salamanca to lecture us, and Antipode in Clark University. Those are two interesting journals. Yves Lacoste has a book which is entitled La géographie sert d'abord à faire la guerre. When I was listening today to the news of the explosion of the Dnieper Dam in the Ukraine, it reminded me very much his research on the dams in Vietnam that were bombed very surreptitiously by the Americans so that the dams would break, flood the fields and the villages that were downstream, and causing tremendous destruction in Vietnam. So geography is quite a valid instrument also for that. But there are also, among the Anglo-Saxons, you have David Harvey, Doreen Massey, Derek Gregory, whom I met in Cambridge in 1980 when I went there following my track of research. As I said, I was at that time working on that. And I want to mention also William Bunge, who had in Detroit a project in 1975 on the Fitzgerald district, where he did cartography of the segments of the city with different criteria from those that were conventionally used. For example, he made the cartography of the districts normally occupied by black people where children were beaten by rats. The bottom line is that space is unequal and is only a reflection of the inequality that prevails in society in general. And in that sense, I suggest, after listening also to Dr. Dominioni before, when he was explaining all the activities carried out by the Council of Europe regarding routes, etc., the fostering of tourism has an enormous amount of opportunities. 12% of the gross national product in Spain is based on tourism, but it also has risks, and they should be taken into account. For example, the emptying of inner cities, of their local populations, the invasion of the Airbnb model, the McDonaldization of some of the sites, tourist sites, the gentrification, the soaring rents that prevent, for instance, young people to be capable of paying a rent in places, in certain places, which may perhaps lead, in cases such as Venice or Barcelona, to big posters saying, tourists go home, because they are fed up with tourists. It may be an asset, but it's also a liability, particularly for local people. So I want to pose this issue of whether even those routes are not depriving certain places or even looting, I would say, the spirit of some of the, quoting Moradiellos right now, the places, if they're looting the places or the sites of their own spirit. Are we going towards that? Is that what preserving the heritage consists of? These are just wide questions. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Maria, for such a beautifully delivered presentation. And I want to compliment you for your desk research. It was very, very detailed. And I'm very, very detailed also in feedback. But for the sake of the time, I'm just going to focus on several things in your paper, actually in your presentation, which actually sounds to me more like a policy analysis than actually an academic original research. But this is understandable, seeing that you're in the second year of your PhD studies, and it's still a kind of like a policy analysis and a bit of literature review. So I want to focus on, let's say, I want to start off by saying that you mentioned critical heritage studies, but you haven't touched upon it. And I think it's critical that you use critical heritage studies in order to also, let's say, denationalize your methodology. As was previously has been said, you focused on Italian and French literature, especially, yes, especially in the field of, let's say, concepts that you employ in the presentation, in the paper, which are, in my own opinion, some of these concepts have been abandoned, like European identity. And if you link these ideas of European identity to your research, if you link it to the policy, especially if you look deeply into the policy on the EU level, you will see that it also has been abandoned in the EU policy language, the concept of European identity. Instead, what has been used more often and more common, but it hasn't been defined, are European values. So I think this is like also something that you should consider. You should also look at the definition of cultural Europeanization, also that has been discussed in Italy in 2023, as you mentioned. In other different kind of literatures has been discussed since the 1990s. And also, I think that you can benefit from, let's say, a critical outlook to what European values actually are, whether they are universal values, and how different institutions working in European continent are employing differently the term European values and what does it mean for them. In terms of culture, and you spoke largely about the cultural policy, you seem to, let's say, put aside the whole kind of development on a European level that the cultural policy had since the 70s especially, and different kind of uses that the cultural policy had in defining what Europe is and what Europe wants to achieve. We can talk about a lot of things maybe in private, but I just want to say one last thing and leave the floor maybe to somebody else on supranational local systems. So this is also a field where I feel that you haven't been critical enough, or maybe not at all. Because when you say that they are grassroots, are they really grassroots? If you're talking about cultural roots, are we really talking about associations and municipalities coming spontaneously together and deciding, whoa, we should do something for our different kind of region, and we are talking about actors that do not actually know each other? Or is it maybe people coming, people, systems, organizations, institutions coming together and responding to available funding mechanisms? So if you respond to available funding mechanisms, and there aren't many for this kind of projects, so are you actually mirroring the policy language of the institution that is giving money? And this is also important for you personally to have for your own positionality in your academic research. By doing a project like this one, are you also mirroring the European institutional language and policy objectives, and what is your stance towards that? So originality, yeah, it's something that you should, and positionality is something you should consider. So this also ties to actually truly fostering ownership of your research ideas, and truly fostering ownership of cultural roots for the organizations and institutions that are involved in managing and implementing it. So pass the microphone to somebody else and we talk later.
Teresa, you have the floor. Let's try to be short. We have 9 minutes left, and I would like also to hear some of the researchers comment on this. Thank you.
Voy a ser muy breve. Hablaré desde mi perspectiva. Yo soy.
I will talk from my perspective. I am a legal person, so any policy or program needs a legal basis, because otherwise it will be very difficult to anchor it. So the same multi-level European governance has its own multi-level legal system. So it is intertwined. And you have talked about it. You have talked very well about it. You have laid it out very well and tried to fit it in. But from fundamental perspective in the introduction, I think it would be useful for you to maybe introduce that system, that multi-level system, because that way you will link the supranational, the international, and the internal, the domestic levels. So you won't need to put them as opposing items. You don't need to try and oppose it to the territory. You will be able to link it. For example, the Charter of Fundamental Rights and the Annex Protocols in the Convention of the Council of Europe that you so conveniently cited, linked to the internal regulations, the competencies that appear at an international, national, and regional level would be linked together with a strict legal connection and the subsidiarity or the cross-border connections on the other side. That's it. That's it. My simple suggestion to try and link everything together. Thank you, Teresa Freises. Professor Brussier.
I think your paper is very interesting, and the chronology, the institutional chronology you propose from 1972 is probably the good one. You spoke about 1987, the cultural roots, and in 1988, you have the first one. Is there a link between the two?
1988.
In 1988.
87. It was 87, the first one.
Yes.
Yes, when the program is born. And then you mean something else 1 year after?
Why was it so closed? It was a response to a global politic or not?
I don't know if there was something in 1988.
So I have one or two more remarks. You spoke about the enlargement of Europe in the East. Were there some new roads after 1990? When did the first project were established? Where and why? The third question is the concept of route. At the very beginning of the process, routes were very clear for everybody. But you have first an enlargement of the idea, the concept of heritage, landscape, etc. And you have also an enlargement of the type. You have regional routes, you have etc. So is there a link between all these, and is there a process in the evolution of the concept itself in these 20 or 30 years? Because I think you cannot build a project, a concept, around the reality of today. And speak about a process that is 30 years old.
Okay, I try to.
So you have to historicize a little bit more in the beginning of your study and to explain this.
So maybe you want to answer, and meanwhile I will ask if there is any. Okay.
Okay, but I try to answer.
Yeah.
Okay. No, yeah, you're right. I mean, there has been an evolution of the concept, and at the beginning it was recognized this pilgrimage route Santiago de Compostela, but then it has been adding different elements in order to bring different projects together, and so we have this thematic route, so highlighting a figure. I don't know. Is it working? No. Hello? Okay, this is working. So sorry. So yeah, it's part of this evolution of the concept. Actually, the concept that I show in the presentation is from 2013. So after this enlarged partial agreement has been created, and they have to, they try to insert different elements to be considered a cultural route. So I think under this evolution of the concept, that's why new routes have been born that were not so much related as at the beginning with, for example, a pilgrimage route, but on a historical figure, a topic, an architectural element, or different types of heritage that can link together European citizens. As for your question of if there are routes linking together East and West, yes, there are many examples of these networks, such as I showed the Jewish heritage route that have members in different countries, but also I know of a route that is one of the ones that I'm working on, the Via Romea Strata, that is coming from the Baltic countries towards Rome, and it's linking all seven countries coming from the east. So they are linking and trying to make this connection between West and East. But I don't know if I understood correctly the question. And the first part about 1988, I couldn't understand because I don't think there was something happening in 1988. But 1987, yes, was the launch of the program. Yes.
The first route was in
87.
87, there was the Camino de Santiago. Yes.
About Eastern Europe.
Yes.
You have to tell us what route,
when,
what route, when, and why.
Mm-hmm.
What
What are they?
where's the project? You cannot speak about that kind of route with the mind of today.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, yes.
Okay, because we short a little bit the time to save some time, but I will say we have still 5 minutes more. Please, you can add 5 minutes to that, and we have a couple of interventions yet from there and from there. So please, Stefania, and then Professor Elber, and maybe Stefan Eladio wants to also to say something. You have a micro there. If no, I will give you mine, and I will take this one.
Bueno, Laura, en primer lugar, enhorabuena.
Thank you, Laura. I enjoyed your presentation very much because you were fabulous. But I wanted to add a comment and the question. You talked about French and Italian literature, or in this field of expertise. But I'd like you to know, I'd like you to talk about how literature is like a manipulated discourse that has been used to favor political ideas. For example, in the 19th century, Spain is looking at England and Germany in the romanticism. We are influenced by the notion of heroes in Germany, but Miguel de Unamuno in the 1920s said, I prefer to look at Portugal rather than France. So it is a change of paradigm because we started to look at Ibero-American after the Napoleon's War, and it also reflected in the rest of fields. This was also found by Menéndez Pelayo and Juan Valera. They said, do not look at Europe, look at Ibero-America. So it is interesting to see that literature followed their steps and started to look at Ibero-Americans. And many important publishing houses in Spain, for example, Nórdica, that use Finnish or Nordic literature, or possibly for Polish literature, are using now translations. Why? Why do they prefer to focus on translations from those languages? And a question now, related to what Jesus said. For example, in Córdoba, we have 4 cultural heritage sites, but now the youth cannot live in the historic center because there's only touristic apartments, and that is giving rise to some kind of the population is rejecting the tourists, and some people are going to live in the outskirts. A few weeks ago, a video went viral because some tourists were drinking and vandalizing the El Potro fountain. This is a place where Cervantes used to live, and they were vandalizing it. So the masses of tourists that flock to the cities, is that irreversible? Well, the cultural roots normally focus on rural areas, even if some routes cross some cities, but 90% of them focus on rural areas, so that can be source for a new economic activity to help population stay. But of course, it has to be manageable, or to prevent it from growing in an uncontrolled way, like many pilgrimages routes in Italy, or maybe St. James in Spain. So the idea is to try and really make them be an idea of the local population who want to get involved in the project and put them up and running. So if this risk is reduced, or at least explicit, if they are grouped in a network, and if they have a reticular layout. In the linear routes, that can be a problem, because if they became famous, then everybody might feel the need to go and use them. So maybe we can learn from the experience of the St. James's Way in France. I'm planning to come to Santiago de Compostela's University next year to try and understand how they handle this idea on the St. James's Way. For example, they're trying to foster the use of alternative ways to the official one, and maybe the winter way is also a great alternative. But yes, of course, thank you for your comment, because that can be dangerous. Thank you very much, Laura. Albert and Eladio, please be as brief as possible, because we need to stick to the times. And then you can talk to them over lunch in a bilateral way, so that you can use the ideas for your final work.
Make it very short. I'd like to invite you to broaden your perspective a bit. Maybe it's a bit unfair, but if you present a project, I think you should be a bit more clear about the quality control aspect. It wasn't me, was it? No. Okay. The question is, to what extent does the concept of cultural roots change the mindset of the people living alongside the route? Is there measurable effect on it? You gave some very sort of general indications in the end of your presentation, that there is still a lot of research to be done. But for me, especially when you talk about European identity or European culture, I'm not going to discuss this concept anymore. There has to be some effect. I mean, the idea behind the cultural roots is pretty clear. But the question is, does it work, this concept?
Mm-hmm. So take into consideration the effects on the people living in the places crossed or involved in.
Use this one.
Thank you. Yes.
Eladio. No sabía si hablar en inglés o en castellano. Lo haré en castellano. No, quería deshacer un...
So read it in know whether to talk in English or Spanish. I wanted to talk about the misconception about the cultural roots, because you know that it is a program organized by the Council of Europe, and one might think that we organize everything. No, the originality or the singularity of the Council of these roots is that they are proposed by the civil society, and then we give them the support they need. We certify whether they can be called a culture route. 18 years before the Faro Convention was signed, this was already a reality, because Faro Convention says that cultural heritage is so important that it can only be protected or fostered by institutions. This is the singularity of this project. Someone in one of the meetings said to me, "Why don't you have a Gothic route?" And I said, well, propose one, because this is not something we at the Council of Europe propose or lead. No, it comes from the civil society. And some people confuse Europe and the Council of Europe. Whether we like it or not, Russia is part of Europe, both geographically and politically. We expelled them from the Council of Europe for obvious reasons last year, but Turkey was dubbed the European sick country for many years. And in Europe, we talk about mechanisms or money. We don't talk about citizens or cultures, but only through culture can we create a European identity. We have many different things and many common things, many common grounds. So culture will make the European project thrive. Well, thank you, Eladio. This is just a comment for you. So you have to take into account in your paper. I liked these remarks very much, so congratulations. Maybe we'll have to look for the link. Eladio was mentioning the evolution of this project or your project for the future, to see whether you can, how it can fit into the European Union project, because sometimes we work on the roots and we resort to the European Union just for funding and for support. So thank you for your presentations, thank you for all your remarks. This is the end of the first presentation. With an applause.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.